The world wasn't watching the war anymore. It had dragged on too long. What started as a 3-week retaliation spiraled into a 4th year of headlines no one read anymore. Cities burned, embassies fell, and timelines moved on. Until they hit Seattle. Not the airport. Not the ports. Microsoft. At exactly 4:42 a.m. local time, a high-precision drone strike, confirmed Iranian origin, struck the east wing of the Redmond campus. The research hub. No casualties miraculously, but entire servers were melted. Prototypes gone. Papers scorched. One building silenced. And by 6 a.m., the world was watching again. By 10:30 a.m., Bill Gates was standing at a podium in a room that wasn't built for war commentary. It was a university auditorium, one he used to give climate talks in. But today, the microphone hummed like a battlefield. He hadn't planned on speaking. Not anymore. He hadn't stepped to a public mic in nearly 8 months. Since stepping back, he'd kept his focus on clean water, vaccines, food security, anything but global tension. But this was different. The camera lights blinked red. The room was quiet, too quiet. Even the air seemed afraid to move. He placed his palms flat on the podium and said, "You didn't bomb a building. You bombed an idea." The room held its breath. I've seen wars. I've sat across from generals. I've shaken hands I regretted. But what you hit last night wasn't just glass and wires. That wing held the AI ethics lab, the refugee education network, the climate prediction cluster. You didn't just attack us. You silenced work meant to protect all of us, including you. He paused, not for effect, to steady his voice. When I stepped away from Microsoft, I thought I was leaving war behind. I thought maybe I'd earned the right to focus on healing. But war has a way of chasing people who try to build peace. In the audience, reporters leaned forward. Students who had come expecting silence were now face to face with something. Electric rage without noise. Grief without panic. Bill Gates didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The world can lose 1,000 buildings and recover, he said. But when we start targeting knowledge, we lose something we can't rebuild, trust. And then softer. But I'm not here to mourn a building. I'm here to tell you we're not done. By the next morning, satellite images of the Microsoft campus had flooded the news. A perfect diagonal scorch line carved through the east wing. The roof peeled like the skin of a fruit. No fire alarms, no bodies, just melted circuits, twisted beams, and a kind of silence that felt deliberate. What hadn't been destroyed was data. Not all of it, at least. The servers in the climate lab had off-site redundancies. The Refugee Learning Network had daily cloud mirroring. But the AI Ethics Center, that one was different. It housed experimental models. Internal only. No backups. Gone. And everyone knew it. Inside a sealed conference room, Bill Gates sat with Foundation board members, UN tech liaisons, and silent assistants taking notes no one would want to read again. "Why that building?" someone finally asked. A young cybersecurity expert, maybe 30, shifted in her seat. "We don't think it was random. That lab housed predictive conflict modeling. It used satellite imagery, historical patterns, and open-source chatter to forecast political instability. It was being tested in Tehran." Silence. "So they hit it to shut us up?" a board member asked. Bill didn't answer right away. His hands were clasped in front of his mouth, his gaze unfocused. "No," he said finally. "They hit it to prove they could. Not just destroy, erase. That evening, Bill appeared on a live stream. No fanfare, no Chiron. Just a black background, a standing mic. And one man who looked 20 years older than his passport said he was. "I want to talk," he said, "about a word we don't use enough, reckoning." He took a breath. "War wants you to pick sides, to cheer for your damage. But if you work in technology, if you build things meant for the world, you don't get that luxury." The chat feed exploded beside him. A cascade of and flags. Accusations, praise, memes. He didn't look at it. "I'm not a general. I'm not a president. But I know what it feels like to lose something you built with hope. And I know what it means to decide whether to rebuild or let fear win." The next morning, he walked the ruins of the lab. No cameras. No entourage. He bent down and picked up a warped metal bracket from the debris. It was once part of a server rack, now mangled like melted scaffolding. He didn't speak. He just stood there holding it. Then quietly, to the only aide near him, he said, "We rebuild it. Not for us. For whoever they were trying to scare." 3 days had passed since the strike. The world had moved on, sort of. News cycles shortened. Analysts speculated. Governments exchanged formal condemnations. But Bill Gates wasn't thinking about diplomacy. He was thinking about voice. Not his own. Hers. Her name was Dalia Mohammadi, a 26-year-old engineer from Esfahan, who had joined the Microsoft AI Ethics Fellowship 2 years earlier. She was one of the few remote fellows connected directly to the Redmond lab. Her last report, received 48 hours before the attack, had suggested algorithmic bias in drone target selection datasets. Now she wasn't answering her emails. At a press event in Geneva hosted by the World Science Forum, Bill was expected to make a carefully worded appearance. His team had prepared a draft statement, something that nodded to tragedy, affirmed neutrality, and committed to resilience. He threw it away. Instead, he stepped to the microphone and spoke without notes. "This is not a retaliation," he said. "And it's not forgiveness either." The crowd hushed. Cameras zoomed in. Some of the attendees, caught mid-coffee sip, froze. This is not about one nation attacking another. This is about fear attacking progress. About silence trying to erase the people who dare to ask the wrong questions at the right time. He paused, looked directly at the front row where UN delegates sat, unblinking. One of our own, a young Iranian researcher, flagged a flaw in global weapons datasets. She did it not to weaken a country, but to prevent another child from becoming a pixel in the wrong surveillance feed. He placed both hands on the podium and leaned in. "She hasn't responded to our messages, and I need the world to hear that." Later that night, in a quiet meeting room with only his communications advisor and an observer present, Bill said something none of them expected. "I want to go to Jordan." The advisor blinked. "Sir?" "Her family fled to Amman last year. If they're still there, I want to speak to them. Not for cameras, not for a quote. For her." "But the security—" Bill waved it off. "I'm not negotiating with anyone. I'm listening." 2 days later, behind a concrete wall and a courtyard of dusty fig trees, Bill Gates sat on a narrow couch across from Dalia Mohammadi's brother. "She's alive," the young man said quietly, "but scared. She thinks if she speaks, she'll be blamed." Bill nodded slowly. "She's not wrong," he said. "But if she never speaks again, the silence will be louder than anything she was trying to stop." The brother hesitated, then pulled out a folded paper, handwritten in English. "She sent this. Said if you ever came looking to give it to you." Bill unfolded it. The first line read, "If progress dies in silence, then let this be noise." It was early evening in Washington, D.C., when Bill Gates stepped into the Senate Tech and Security Subcommittee chamber. He wasn't required to be there. No formal hearing, just an invitation to discuss the ethical vulnerabilities of global tech and infrastructure in wartime. Most CEOs would have sent a spokesperson or lawyer. Bill came alone. The room was packed: senators, defense analysts, tech critics, and a sea of cameras mounted to record every blink. Some expected him to defend Microsoft's role. Others assumed he'd frame the drone strike as proof of foreign aggression. Most just waited for the usual scripted diplomacy. He disappointed them all. "I'm not here to explain why we were attacked," he began, standing calmly at the center podium. "I'm here to explain why it worked." Heads turned. "You see, we built systems so powerful, we convinced ourselves they were untouchable. Not just physically, but morally. We created labs that predicted the future. But we failed to build ethics into the present." He held up a piece of folded paper. "This is a letter," he said, "from a young Iranian engineer. Her code helped identify bias in international targeting data. She warned us. She saved lives. Then she vanished." He placed the letter gently on the table beside the mic. "One algorithm adjusted because of her work likely prevented a civilian market from being mistaken for a weapons hub." He paused, voice steady. "She made the world safer. And in return, she went silent out of fear." A senator from Texas leaned forward. "Mr. Gates, with all due respect, are you saying we're responsible for this? We're spilling onto our soil?" Bill didn't flinch. I'm saying we're responsible for what our silence encourages. When knowledge becomes a target and we do nothing, we aren't just bystanders. We're co-authors. A stir moved through the chamber. Reporters stopped typing. Even the cynics looked up. Then finally, he delivered the line that would echo across newsrooms and timelines for weeks. You cannot separate innovation from consequence. And if you try, don't be surprised when someone else decides the cost. He didn't wait for questions. He folded the letter, tucked it back into his jacket, and walked out of the room before the cameras could recover. That night, across social media and late-night commentary, the phrase trended in a dozen languages. Innovation without consequence is just fire with better marketing. But for Bill Gates, the soundbite didn't matter. What mattered was the next step. And that next step was already being built in silence. It was raining the day they broke ground again in Redmond. Not for a new product, not for a server farm, for something different, something symbolic. They called it the Resolve Wing, a rebuilt lab, exactly where the AI Ethics Center once stood. But redesigned from the ground up, not just stronger, transparent, literally, one full wall made, entirely of reinforced glass, open to the campus walkways, so that no one, staff, guests, interns, could ever say again that progress was being made in secret. Bill Gates stood under a gray canopy, watching as the first steel beams were lowered into place. His coat was soaked, but he didn't flinch. Behind him, a modest crowd had gathered. No press was invited. No stream, no trending hashtags, just the people who still believed in building. In a private briefing days earlier, he had outlined the project to a small group of former engineers, researchers, and educators who had worked in the original lab. This isn't a comeback, he'd said plainly. This is a correction. He tapped on a projected slide. It showed an open access model, no passcodes, no clearance levels, for datasets related to autonomous targeting, drone ethics, and geopolitical bias in AI training materials. It's open source, someone said, startled. Bill nodded. If we want to build systems that protect people, then people need to be able to see what we're building. Someone in the room, a refugee from Aleppo, now a project coordinator, whispered, "They'll hate this." "I know," Bill replied. "And that's how we know it matters." 2 weeks later, at a global tech conference in Oslo, Bill took the stage not as a CEO, but as something more difficult, a messenger. He walked up to the podium with only a slim folder in hand. "I don't have a product to pitch today," he began, "but I have a file, a simple PDF." He held it up. "It's the full framework for the Resolve Wing, the architecture, the team structure, the public accountability interface, the whistleblower protections, everything. It's all downloadable. Right now, no passwords, no tracking." A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some will call this naive. Others will say it's a security risk. Maybe it is. But ask yourself, what's riskier? That the world sees how we make decisions, or that it never does? That night, the download link trended in over 40 countries. Some governments banned it. Others quietly mirrored it. A professor in Nairobi used it in her ethics class. A whistleblower in Warsaw sent it to his team. A former defense contractor in New Jersey posted, "Finally, blueprints for building with conscience." And back in Seattle, Bill sat alone on the upper floor of the Foundation Library, staring at a live map of downloads. Each flickering dot wasn't just a user. It was a witness, the kind you need when you're rebuilding trust, not just buildings. The new lab opened quietly. No ribbon cutting, no tech demo, just a single modest plaque at the entrance that read, "The Resolve Wing, in memory of voices silenced, and in honor of those who still speak." Inside, the walls were etched with names, not of investors or engineers, but of those who had once been statistics: Elira, Dahlia, Hamza, Layla, people who had worked on systems, flagged errors, questioned decisions, and paid for it. Bill Gates walked through the space on a Tuesday afternoon, long after most had left. The lab's interior was bright. Sunlight poured in from the glass wall. Outside, students wandered the campus with coffee in hand, unaware that 12 months earlier, this ground had been ash and steel. He stopped in front of a large interactive display. It was running live. Simulations, real-time ethical threat, assessments from regions across the globe. But instead of colored bars or heat maps, the interface translated the data into plain language. This model suggests a risk of civilian misclassification in northwest Syria due to image blur in reconnaissance feeds. Local infrastructure updates may trigger false military indicators in West Africa, flagged for review. Beneath each line was a button labeled, "Challenge this model." Anyone could press it, anyone. That was the point. 2 days later, Bill was back in front of a crowd, this time not in Geneva or DC, but at a high school auditorium in Tacoma. The event wasn't billed as a speech, just a Q&A with tech students. No security, no stage. He sat on a folding chair, sleeves rolled up, and answered questions about everything from global infrastructure to the ethics of data collection. Then a quiet voice from the back asked, "Mr. Gates, do you think we're too late?" Bill leaned forward. The room went still. "I think," he said carefully, "we're never too early to start again." He paused, then added, "They hit a building, but they couldn't hit what we built next." In the weeks that followed, the Resolve Wings model was adopted in 2 EU commissions, mirrored by an African Union task force, and quietly studied by an independent Russian academic group. But Bill didn't make a tour of it, didn't attach his name to the updates. He simply kept showing up, in classrooms, community labs, and obscure forums, repeating the same message. You can't bomb an idea, not if it learns to rebuild. One morning, nearly a year after the strike, an envelope arrived at the foundation addressed, in handwritten Farsi. Inside was a single photo, a girl with dark eyes, sitting at a laptop smiling. On the back a message. "My sister lives. She writes code now. She says thank you for not forgetting." Back in the lab under the glass wall, Bill Gates pinned the photo beside the plaque. He stood quietly, no cameras, no applause, just one man remembering what the world almost lost. Then he turned and walked back into the lab, because there was more to build,